here to help you with breeze. Planting seeds and teaching skills. Teachers turn schoolyards to dreams. Who hates school gardens with ease?
Hello and welcome to School Gardens with Ease podcast. I'm your host, Leila, and this is episode number 17. In this episode, I want to simplify and demystify planting seeds because seeds come in all different sizes and shapes, and they need to be sown outside or started as seedlings indoors, and they all need different spacing and different timing. So, to an untrained teacher's eye, it all sounds super complicated and confusing, especially when you add the timing of it all on top. And the last thing that I want for you is to get hung up on step number one. I want you to have the confidence to start a garden without worrying that it is too complicated and wasting your precious time on finding specific information for every single seed variety. It's really not that complicated at all, actually. So let's get started. Let's get the most complicated part of all of this out of the way right away at the beginning, and that's timing. Depending on where in the world you teach, you'll have your own weather patterns in terms of when it gets cold, warm, how long, how much, and all of that. When is your first frost and last frost, etc. That's called your gardening zone or hardiness zone or planting zone. Gardening zones in North America are organized by numbers and letters. They start from 1 all the way to 13. The higher the number, the warmer the weather and the longer the growing season. So, places like North Alaska, for example, have a gardening zone of 1, which means the average minimum temperatures are in a year are minus 60 to minus 50 Fahrenheit or minus 51 to minus 45 Celsius. That's pretty cold. Here in Toronto, Canada, we have a gardening zone of 5B, which is minus 26 to minus 23 Fahrenheit or minus 15 to minus 10 Celsius, which is still pretty cold, but not that bad. And then there are places like south of Florida or California with gardening zone of 11, which means it never gets cold. Obviously, I can't tell all of you what to plant when because it all depends on your gardening zone. But here's where technology comes in. There is a website called growveg.com that I always send teachers to. Links in the show notes. You tell it where in the world you teach and also the list of plants you want to grow, and it spits out a color-coded schedule that tells you all of the timing that you need to know. When to start them indoors, when to transplant or sow them directly in the garden outside, even when you can expect to have harvest. No need to, look up every one of the seeds and the timing that matches your gardening zone and, your frost dates and all of that, because that's very frustrating. I just love it when humans make tools that simplify complicated tasks. And this is one of them. This eliminates the daunting task of figuring it all out all by yourself is huge help. Now you don't need to be an expert. So that takes care of the timing part of starting seeds. There are two other aspects that you need to consider. One is the location, meaning if the seed needs to be sown directly out in the garden or it needs to be, planted as seedlings indoors first and then transplanted out in the garden, or both. Some seeds are like okay with both of these options. And the second thing to consider is spacing. So let's talk through them one by one. The location, indoors versus outdoors, is the easiest one. So let's get that out of the way first. There are some plants that do not tolerate transplanting. If their root is disturbed by transplanting, they will not grow well. Most root vegetables are in this category. So if you're planting carrots, beets, and radishes, they need to be sown outside directly. Or if indoors, they need to be, planted directly in their ultimate container, in their eventual home, and not ever be transplanted anywhere else. Other than the root vegetables, there are a few other plants that don't like transplanting. An example of those plants is spinach. Now, to find out which of these seeds that you want to plant for with your class are in this category, that color-coded planting schedule that GrowVeg spits out for you is perfect for this too. On that color coded schedule, there are three colors: blue representing the time that you plant indoors, green representing the time to sow outside or transplant outside, and orange is the expected harvest time. Those that cannot be transplanted will not have a blue line in front of them. Their line will start with green, which tells you that they cannot be started indoors. They have to be seeded or sowed outdoors. Makes it easy peasy. And this is important. You don't know how many times I've gone to consultations for schools seeing carrots in little pots on the window ledge. Those carrots don't have enough room in those little pots to grow juicy and big, and they will not survive transplanting anywhere else. So essentially, they're doomed. And that's sad. It's very discouraging when kids plant something and they have to watch it dwindle and die. Not worth the effort. And the result is actually the opposite of what you want, which is empowering your students with the idea that growing food is easy and they can do it. That's the whole point. So please pay attention to this. Now, the last thing that you need to consider when starting seeds is spacing. Everyone makes a huge big deal out of spacing. I think that spacing is important, but a tiny little bit overrated sometimes. I usually grow things closer to each other than most people do because I love gardens that are lush and beautiful. As long as your soil is rich, you're good to go. And it works totally fine. Trick is to plant companions together, those that have, different root systems close to each other. But to make it simple for you, I categorize seeds into three spacing categories. I call them sprinklers, 1 inchers, and 1 footers. The sprinklers are seeds that need to be sown really close to each other. They either prefer to be cluster planted, like leaf lettuce, for example, or at least don't mind it, like most annual herbs. Things like parsley, dill, coriander, even basil. Everything you see sold as a bunch at the supermarket are in this category. And most things that you see sold at supermarkets as salad greens, things that are like arugula, different types and colors of lettuce, all of that are in this category. You can grow them dense and bushy. And as the name suggests, you sprinkle them on top of the soil, letting them lay really close to each other. You know how you sprinkle sugar sprinkles on top of your ice cream. Each seed needs close to no space for itself, and it's willing and in some cases very happy to be planted with other friends. These are seeds that are also usually very tiny. Even if you are determined and want to space them, you wouldn't be able to, especially your students wouldn't be. Or you would need to, spend a lot of time and go about them with tweezers and lots of patience. Not worth doing at all and way above the attention span and patience of your students. Sometimes we just sprinkle them all in the surface of the soil, and sometimes you can create mini little drenches with your fingers and lines of drenches, and then sprinkle them inside that line and then space those lines for about 1 or 2 inches. That would look very nice and tidy when they grow. The second category is what I call the 1 inchers. These are seeds that need around 1 inch of space, 1 or 2 inches of space around them. The seeds of this category usually are bigger than the sprinklers, so it's easier for your students to actually pick them up one by one and space them. Radish and spinach are, the ones that are good examples of this. In fact, I think that if you go to my recommended list of seeds for schools, these are the only two that are in this category. If you don't have that list yet, the link is in the show notes. So there's sprinklers, there's 1 inchers, and then there's carrots, which are actually both. Carrots need 1 to 2 inches of space around them, but their seeds are very tiny and they also love to be cluster planted, aka sprinkled. So the way you should lead your students to plant carrots is to sprinkle them in lines that are 1 or 2 inches apart, and when they grow up, then thin them. Thinning is the act of cutting those extra seeds that are, growing really close to each other so that the rest of them that you let be in the garden grow strong. So you would keep the first carrot and then cut all the other carrots for 1 inch, keep 1 carrot, cut for 1 inch, keep 1 carrot, so on and so forth. This might look like a waste of many seeds, but again, carrots germinate better when they're cluster planted, and they grow very well when they are buried with friends. But after they are all around 1 or 2 inches tall, then they need their own space, hence the thinning practice. So this is actually the best way to plant carrots. And the third category are what I call 1-footers. These are plants that need 1 square foot of space around them to grow tall and strong. And most fruit-producing plants and edible flowers are in this category. So your tomatoes, beans, corns, eggplants, marigolds, etc. are in this category. Essentially, I put everything else that's not in the first and second category in this third category. These seeds are better to be started as seedlings indoors and then transplanted when they are at least 1 or 2, a few inches tall, and they have grown many strong, true leaves. And of course, based on your gardening zone and planting schedule, you don't want to be transplanting tomatoes out in the middle of March around here where I teach. It's way too cold for tomatoes at that time. And when you transplant these out, you give them 1 square foot of space. Now, that does not mean that you can't plant anything else in their space. It means that you can't plant any of the 1-footers in their space. I encourage you to sprinkle sprinklers all around the 1-footers, especially those that like partial shade. Things like leaf lettuce, arugula, for example. The root depth and nutritional needs of these categories are different, and they will not compete like 2 1-footers would if you plant them all in 1 square foot. Sprinklers sprinkle around the base of the 1-footers has other benefits too. It ensures that the soil is covered, so the soil is protected, water is conserved, and weeds are suppressed. And also, your garden will look much more beautiful and full of plants and lush. One of the most important techniques in permaculture is the idea of planting guilds. Guilds are a set of different plants that help each other grow well when they're planted together. It's the same concept called Three Sisters when the indigenous peoples of the Americas planted corn, bean, and squash together. It's an ancient technique, very powerful one. The concept of companion planting also comes from the same basic idea. Plant a biodiverse garden that has many different species in close proximity to each other. This way, you'll have a much healthier, much easier to maintain, and much more beautiful garden. Hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions about starting seeds, and I'll do my best to answer them in future episodes. Talk to you soon in another episode. You've listened to the entire episode, and for that, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And please share this episode with other teachers who might be interested in this topic. See you next week for a new episode.